So, with this, I would like to welcome Mr. Ankit Bhatt, Chief Strategy Officer, MapMy India. Mr. Ankit has 11 plus years, has worked with MapMy India. He holds a bachelor degree in electronics and instrumentation engineering from the Birla Institute of Technology and Science, Pilani 2010. Ankit drives the strategy of the core location platform products and its growth, sales management, company wide marketing, and international expansion through our international brand. Mapples. He also represents the company at various industry conclaves and seminars. So, with this, I would like to welcome Mr. Ankit Bhatt for a technology presentation on digital transforming the BFSI industries, the BFSI enterprises through location AI. Over to you, Mr. Ankit.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for the introduction, Hina. And very excited to be here at this technology, summit, and a very interesting space where we're seeing over the last couple of years. There's been tremendous growth and there's been tremendous change, mostly technology led in the country. And I'm kind of privileged to be here to talk about how many of these use cases, how the industry is transforming using maps and location also as a perspective from our side. um, but before that, what I'll try to do is I'll set some context on what we see as the next trends in the industry, and how technology, and specifically from our perspective, maps and location can play a pivotal role in increasing the reach of the industry and getting more and more distribution, and also making sure the industry moves forward in a very fast and efficient way. So, for context, we all know that in the country, uh, not only banking credit but also premiums as a part of the GDP are very low if you compare it with other peers in at least, let's take Asia as an example. So if you look at India, it ranks actually pretty far behind where you look at penetration of financial assets. So what does that tell us? That tells us that there's a huge room for growth, right? And the future is extremely bright. But that has to be done in a way where it is efficient, and it is also serving the needs of the local people in a more technology driven way, because technology kind of leads to extreme efficiency. And COVID has also kind of pushed most of us in, as consumers and even as enterprises, to be extremely digital first. So we're seeing a wave of companies, especially in the BFSI sector, that are trying to move their operations, digital first. Even from some statistics that we were kind of going through, premiums as a percentage of GDP are very low, and that is again, the whole sector is kind of, I would say, at brink of extreme growth, where you look at insurance as an entire sector, whether it's life or non-life. And some of the challenges, if you look at the unique nature of how the credit demand and risk is in the sector, extremely unique, especially in India, and how field operations. I mean, this entire sector, whether it's insurance or banking, is completely field operations driven, a very large amount of field operations driven, and that information asymmetry, in the sense that where did your field verification person go, and what address the consumer gave, are they the same, are they not? Simple questions, and these are very easy questions that can be solved using location technology and AI. And definitely the hyperlocal nature and the local nature of the Indian customer base, which needs to be addressed, as we are a very large population, and that reach is only going to happen through a completely local approach. So we firmly believe the way forward is phygital, which is the combination of digital with the physical. And a lot of these questions, like I'll pop up right now, are solved when you take all of the information that's there and put it through a physical representation, which is kind of location and maps. And that's why maps and location are so critical. It is almost as critical as something as moving to the cloud, or as putting any other infrastructure element, like a CRM or systems and processes in place. It is getting that critical right now. Simple questions like which physical clusters are negative or delinquent, or how do you lend or securely to a very wide base, um, or do you wish that some of your lending practices and are smarter and hyperlocal, or how do you increase lending by about 20%, and what did those lending institutions do using data like that, and what does maintaining clean location data and clean addresses mean, and how does that add to your repository and your digital business as you go forward, and how does that help you verify customers better. That's what brings us to the main, and I'll go through our bunch of interesting use cases. But the point was, how is location and these AI technologies affecting this entire sector and moving it forward in very, very interesting and powerful ways. So I'll start with banking first, and then I'll kind of move into insurance and other areas. But as you divide banking as a typical bank into assets and liabilities, the amount of areas in the assets, you know, uh, that in the asset sector that you can actually transform are huge. And I'll start with, let's say, just customer onboarding and verification, right? In the first step of it. So when you're trying to verify a customer, you can also digitally verify them. That's the interesting bit. That if there is an app and the customer is told, to give his location, and he has entered an address, or the address is there in the Aadhaar or any other system, you can actually verify those. You can check if the location that's being reported from his phone, in which the app is, versus the address that's there, let's say on Aadhaar, or what he's actually entered, are the same or not, right? So that's a very interesting verification use case. Or if the person is actually being verified by a field verifier through an agency, and the field verifier actually captures locations through his phone, and the customers enter addresses, so you can actually compare whether that address is the same as that location or the lat long that's there. So that gives you a very powerful uh, input uh, for the underwriting process, and for actually making sure that the verification is going is correct. um, and going forward, we've seen a lot of customers trying to implement more and more such technologies when the customer is being onboarded itself. So when the customer is trying to enter his address in the CRM or to any open box text box, we're implementing AI technologies there. So as they're typing in their address, the system or the computer behind is understanding what address it is prompting them, is this the address, is this the house, is this the pin code. So it's becoming more technology driven at the consumer end itself, which enables you to have less errors in the address that's actually captured, and therefore much higher verification uh, you know uh, possibilities and very high verification capabilities. So location is playing an extremely vital role in verification. When you come to credit risk assessment, so uh, as the customer is onboarded and you're kind of working through with the customer, integrating location and at the LMS and the LOS, and managing and understanding how the how customers are interacting at that point of time. That's also very important from a customer management perspective. And also, when you come to debt collections, collection agents or third party agencies can be mandated to send location of the end customer, so that the institution knows where they're actually going, or can re-verify the customer's location if the location wasn't correct. So, and also the entire debt collection process can be optimized, and the beats and routes can be optimized. And we've seen a ton of use cases where our optimization engines for routes and beats are planned and done by a bunch of algorithms that are able to assist the field people who are going for these collections, and therefore make them way more productive, therefore way more collections in lesser amount of time. So that's a very powerful role of location in the collections process also. And after all of this, how do you gather all this data and do strategic planning and intelligence? And that strategic planning intelligence can play a role in credit scoring. So if you're trying to create credit scores, how do you create scores by knowing what's around the person? So if you get an address, what is around that local hyperlocal catchment of the person, and that plays an integral role in knowing what the credit score of the person should be. So that's extremely critical. And also from a risk perspective, as you onboard a lot of customers and you serve them, you kind of try to understand patterns of customers on geographically. So what that means is certain areas will behave differently than other areas, and also the underlying data in those geographical areas. For example, if you have a lot of exposure in a specific area that has a high seismic score, so what that means is there's huge exposure in that area, and you probably don't want to expose more, loans, or you want to sell more in that region. So whether it's seismic or natural data or any other data which is around delinquency, that can play a huge role in analyzing risk. Um, from a liabilities perspective, like how do you take cash and how do you know uh, transport that cash in a very optimal manner from ATM to ATM and using the cash man tracking mechanism. So that's a very interesting use case we've seen where banks want to consolidate the entire information and then optimize it. After they optimize that information, they're able to efficiently distribute cash van operations, and have their cash van vendors also work more efficiently and on routes that are more productive. Um, and also, we've seen very interesting use cases around location-based marketing. So, as you're engaging customers using credit cards or other mediums, how do you make sure that the customer is more loyal, and also the customer is interacting with your services more? And we've seen a huge lift when all of that is done via location. And location and maps are extremely integral in making sure that the customers are interacting more with, let's say, cards or any other as any other products that they're using from the institution. So um, that's an extremely critical experience. And also when the customer has an app, you're able to even communicate to them better basis the location that they're closer to. So if the the cards that are there have tied up with certain merchants, you can communicate with them in real time or kind of understand their behavior and then make for better offers for the customer. So you've seen a huge uplift when that is done with location. Also, from an insurance perspective, the most of the use cases are heavily around risk underwriting and actuarial science, where uh, NatCat reports can be built around certain regions. So, if there is a specific area or a very high, you know, it's a very high risk area, so a whole NatCat representation of the area can be made, basically to know that, okay, what is, or if an insurer is insuring a very large basin in an area or a entire building, something that is of high value, the hyperlocal nature of that area and what kind of statistics help you to take that risk decision. So that, and to build a specific NatCat report of that area becomes extremely critical for the risk process itself. So that's something that we've already seen, and that's extremely valuable in making sure that the decision that's been taken is better. Um, and typical other use cases around customer onboarding, even if it's through a call center, through an app, or through field processes, location plays a very critical role in making sure addresses are captured well, and therefore, the underwriting and the basic process of maintaining the hygiene of the customers are good. Uh, and similarly, around premium collections, claim investigations, as the sales or the collections are happening, that whole process, workflow process, is being integrated with location. And not only just knowing where a customer is and if a field agent is actually going there, but around the fact that how do you increase their productivity? Are the beats productive enough, or can you actually optimize it and make sure that the workforce is more productive than they are right now? So that optimization of all the beats plays an integral role in making sure the field force is very productive. Then again, from a location marketing perspective, hyperlocal, personalized offers, and also from a strategic planning intelligence, which is where do you put up branches? Why do you put up branches in certain areas? And if you put a branch or you expand in a specific area, does it give you maximum bang for your buck? Are there competitors around? Are there proxies for, that there is a high underpenetrated base or a high spending base in that region? So these are extremely critical business decisions for business intelligence. So I'll quickly go through a couple. We talked about location, for customer onboarding, basically in a way that as you're entering addresses, how do you, kind of take in either use a map as an input. So as you put the pin on the map, the entire structured address, goes into your repository, and you maintain a very clean data lake around something like this. So basically, you get the pin code, the state, the the building, the district, all of that information, and that stays in the data lake to run geospatial queries or run at least these specific queries around these locations. Also, to standardize addresses, if you have a lot of existing addresses, which are large repository of addresses, how do you standardize them, and how do you basically kind of run these algorithms to make sure that this can be again kept back in your database as a clean tokens. Even from a verification perspective, if a field person goes to a particular area, how do you get a machine computer address? So if you look at this address here, you have the city. If this was the location where the field person was, you have the city, district, state, pin, street, locality, even the POI, which means the landmark. So a landmark nearby, and also the distance from the POI and the distance from the street, and a full formatted address that can again go back to your data. So again, your verification is very an interesting thing, that the lat long that's captured from the ground and the address that was given by the customer match exactly, right? So this is typically a very powerful use case in verification. uh, Also, from assigning, if a loan request comes in, which branch or which person you assign it to can be basis location. From a credit and risk perspective, this is another area which is pretty powerful. So as the delinquency data is being mapped, we can essentially automatically create negative areas, and if new customer requests come in from those areas, we'll easily be able to tell you whether those requests are coming in from these negative areas. So that also becomes a very powerful tool to utilize for large consumer use cases. And from a catchment analysis, so if you have a lot of branches, and how do you know what's around the catchment? How do you know whether the field people are going sales people are actually approaching the right establishments or buildings? So this whole hyperlocal data can be very powerful to fuel more business in those areas. And from a natcat perspective, like, these are basically heat maps that are describing what are the high damage risk zones, or where earthquakes, for example, happen more. So what is the customer spread or density in those areas? And this is very critical from either the loan exposure or also from the insurance exposure perspective, that what kind of exposure lies in these areas, and are they concentrated in areas that are very, very high propensity for damage. And then from a field force, we talked about multiple field force use cases where uh, beats can be planned that are more efficient. There are ways in which you can optimize the entire route of a field person, whether a daily or a weekly route, and that essentially makes it very easy to then increase productivity across like thousands of people. And another use case is around automating things like simple things like reimbursement, which can be basis location. So basis exact location that's been traveled, the reimbursement can be set by that, or actually knowing if the field person has actually visited a customer, so in a geofence. So something like this, that you actually know the visits of all the field people, and uh, whether they have actually visited customers or not, and automate their entire reimbursement schedules. Another very interesting use case was how do you interact more with your customers, right? How do you make sure that customers are getting offers in areas that you know that they are? So this is an example of where we were able to build offline online behavior of a specific customer, and uh, they were able to interact more with merchants and swipe their cards more with that merchant, because those merchants were close to that person, and also in real time they were actually entering some of these merchants. So that actually increases the relationship the uh, between the customer and the institution that's providing them, let's say, credit card in this case, and definitely increases the transactions, because anyways after COVID we've started behaving very hyper locally as a base also. Also from an acquisition perspective, whether it's branch expansion or analyzing a particular new area that you're trying to enter, and what is the competition in these cities. And we talked about cash van tracking, that how do you track all the cash vans and plan their routes automatically. um, so yeah, that those were all the interesting use cases that we thought we would talk about. And I thought I'll also mention that we had integrated with the Coven portal in 2020, and it's still live right now. You will see Map India maps on it in the portal as you're trying to search for vaccination centers, and you can actually book your vaccination center on the map itself. We power most of internet or corporate services in India. It's a very large base of customers that we work with, and even in the government. So that was it. I hope this session was interesting, and I try to cover almost all the different use cases where maps and location technologies are being used. And I look forward to any questions, thoughts. Please feel free to reach out to us, and I'll leave that to the organizers to help us connect with you. But firstly, thanks a lot for having us at this tech.
Thank you so much, Ankit. Thanks for being here. Also, Ankit, I wanted to share there are a few questions which our audience has dropped through this event. Like one
Okay.
question, as you can see, that there will your AI offering help in reduction in operational cost and risk? Would you like to take this question for the
Yeah,
audience?
definitely. So yes, it can. In operational costs, there's a very large way in which operational costs can be reduced, and we have seen those cases where especially field force, and where exactly customers are going. Sorry, where exactly the field people are going, and this large base of operations, we're able to reduce the cost, and also make sure that you're doing more with the base that's there. And one more large part of reducing operational costs is using digital verification. So if you have the location of a customer, uh, and you have the address of a customer, we can match that and tell you whether it's right or wrong. And that essentially helps you in re-verification, or extra operational costs in sending, just to know if the person is in the right region or right, or if the address and lat long are correct or not. We also have techniques in which you can verify through an app itself. So you do not need to send someone. That's huge operational cost benefits when you don't need to do any of that physically, and you can do that virtually. From a risk perspective, yes, one of the I talked about a bunch of use cases where, uh, if it is from whether it is a lending base or it's an insured base, uh, we can basically geomap them and then tell you whether those areas are very, and especially the areas where you have highest concentration, whether they are in areas that are of highest risk, for example, a lot of earthquake probability, flood probability. And that essentially will, and also weather, we have real time weather also coming in. So any of these predictions can be made on that base to tell you how that risk, how risk can be affected from a geographic perspective.
So, thank you, Ankit, for a wonderful answer to our audience. Thanks for sharing your insights. So, thank you so much. And I would like to tell my audience that today, Map My India is one of the prime sponsors for us as a digital transformation partner. So, keep coming and keep sharing your insights. That's really wonderful to have you, Ankit, on the platform. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Bye
Thank
bye.
you. Bye. So with this, we end the first technology presentation on digital transforming the BFSI enterprise through location AI. We will take a quick break of 5 minutes and we'll be back with the third panel of the day on technology for good, evolution of cloud AI, ML, and new age BFSI industry. Stay back with us. We'll be back in 5 minutes.